The Pink Floyd. You're going to hear them in a minute, and I don't want to prejudice you. Hear them and see them first, and we'll talk about them afterwards.
In 2005, 4 distinguished rock musicians performed together for the first time in 25 years at Live 8. For a precious 20 minutes, they were all, once again, the legendary Pink Floyd, a band that has spanned 40 years, pioneering everything from underground rock to the stadium extravaganza. A band that has survived tragedy, shunned celebrity, and wrestled publicly with both its success and its audience. There have been 5 men in Pink Floyd, and 3 of them have led the band in different decades. That's why the question still remains, which one's Pink? London, 1965. British pop music rules the world. Clubs are throbbing with electric guitars, pounding drums, and would-be rock and roll stars. 3 middle-class students, Rick Wright, Roger Waters and Nick Mason, were studying architecture at the Regent Street Polytechnic. They formed a band and dreamed of escaping the profession they seemed destined to inhabit. Their group went through several permutations and names, including the T-Set and Sigma 6, performing standard cover versions of American and British rhythm and blues. They were going nowhere. A childhood friend of Roger Waters since their school days together in Cambridge drifted down to London to study painting. His name was Syd Barrett. He joined Sigma 6, renamed the band the Pink Floyd Sound, and promptly became its frontman.
Syd sort of lived like he walked. He walked with a bounce. He came up on his toes, so every step he took was like a pop. You know, he had a lot of sort of Tigger in him.
He was, as everyone says, bubbly, very attractive. Everyone wanted to be his friend.
Barrett was a highly original writer and musician. His songs had a quirky British pastoral edge, and his guitar playing led the band into extended sonic explorations.
He would do things on the guitar that no one would ever dream of doing, which influenced me, so that made me do things on the keyboards that I wouldn't, people haven't done before. Technically, no, not so brilliant, but for me, the technique is not important. It's the originality. And he was one of the originals.
It is a very curious thing that people can go into music business with actually relatively little technical ability, but an absolute determination to show off at all costs.
You know, if you can actually play, it's very hard not to copy other things that you hear. You know, but we couldn't copy anything because we couldn't, you know.
Rick was certainly the only one who went to music school, and Rick was the one who would help out in arrangements. He was the one who used to tune Roger's bass.
Now simply called Pink Floyd, the band found itself at the epicentre of London's underground explosion, playing a unique mix of original melodic pop and freak-out music at clubs such as UFO and Middle Earth. Overnight, they became the house band of the underground movement, taking their audiences on a trip.
One of the things that sets them apart is so many other bands are based around blues, that they had this avant-garde approach to their long instrumental passages. But they always started from a brilliant pop song by Syd.
tinkling and bashing and scraping and making the instruments make whatever noises they would. You know, and then after we'd been doing that for like 10 minutes or something, we go, all right, back in and play the riff twice more, and that was the end of it.
You still had a tune, a song, and then you would have an improvised bit, and then you'd have a tune and a song. It was radical. It was, and it was very radical.
Arnold Lane had a strange hobby, collecting clothes, moonshine, washing lime. They suit him fine.
Arnold Lane, an everyday tale of a man stealing women's underwear from washing lines, was the first of Barrett's original songs to be recorded as a demo. Produced by Joe Boyd, it was touted around several companies before the Beatles label, EMI, signed the band in February 1967. From the start, the Floyd were determined to do things their way. As college boys, they were already wary of the pop business and its old-school managers.
We were always very, very distrustful of that whole scene. It was very kind of East End camel hair coats, you know. Stick with me, son, you'll be all right, you know. And we were very, very, very wary of all that.
I think what was so different then to now is they'd sign almost anything with long hair, you know, and if it turned out to be a golden retriever, hey, so what?
We signed you as a pop band. Now you make albums, lots of 3-minute singles. And we said, no way.
We're talking about a world where Sgt. Pepper hadn't been released, and, you know, almost overnight, it switched from being hit singles to being albums.
In early '67, the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper at London's Abbey Road studios. In February, the Floyd arrived at the same studios to record their equally momentous first album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. This was the summer of love. Everything was possible.
Yippee, you can't see me, but I can.
EMI appointed the Beatles' engineer, Norman Smith, as the Floyd's producer.
I know he had a struggle with Syd, because Syd would come in with his extraordinary songs, and I think Norman would say, oh, it's great. Look, we've got to put some form to it, we've got to get it into time. And Syd would say, yes, okay, and then go out and play it a different way.
The Floyd were determined to exploit everything Smith and Abbey Road could offer, experimenting with new sounds and recording techniques.
We had a tape running around microphone stands all the way around the control room, so we could get a very slow delay, going through 3 tape recorders. Delay.
One of the advantages of Abbey Road was that there was an awful lot of old sort of stuff lying around, so I think they probably had a spinet or a clavichord or, you know, things like that.
While the Floyd tinkered away recording Syd's fairy tale songs and a studio version of one of the extended sonic improvisations they were playing in the underground clubs, producer Norman Smith struggled to get another single out of Barrett. The band eventually decamped here, Sound Techniques in West London, where Joe Boyd had produced Arnold Lane, to record what would become their first big hit.
Emily tries but misunderstands. She's often inclined to borrow somebody's dreams till tomorrow.
Barrett invited an old friend and musician from Cambridge to come to the recording sessions. Guitarist and singer David Gilmour was shocked by what he found.
In the flesh, he was a little bit strange and glazed eyes. And for me, having not seen him for a while, it was quite alarming to see him like that. I didn't know how alarming or how alarmed I should be, or how permanent that sort of thing was, or whether that was just a moment. You see, you don't really think about it.
Barrett was becoming increasingly erratic. He was taking too many drugs and didn't like the limelight. When his song See Emily Play climbed into the top 10, the cracks began to appear.
I think we did a lot more pops shows and ballrooms, and I think that was probably a bit more difficult for them. And that was probably a bit difficult for Syd.
Syd didn't want to play it. I was particularly feeling quite the same. I didn't want to really play it, and I don't think any of the band wanted to play it. So it pissed the audiences off a lot. Had a few beer bottles and stuff thrown at us.
These shows were a million miles away from Pink Floyd's underground home base, where the band, like its audience, was lost in the light show.
They were deliberately devoid of personality. They didn't talk much. You know, the fact that they were covered with these lights all the time. They'd all, study their instruments. Nobody looked out.
Are you having a good time? Yeah, let's go, clap your hands, all that stuff. We'd never done that. In fact, we did like to hide behind the lights. And it became a kind of, who are these people?
My memory of seeing them is walking around the stage trying to work out where the noise came from. What Rick played and what Syd played were very, very well blended together.
When Barrett emerged from the shadows and into the studio lights of Top of the Pops, he went into meltdown.
The second week that we went in, Syd was very disgruntled, and he started saying, why should I have to do this? John Lennon doesn't have to do this. And I was looking at him going, what the fuck are you talking about? This is it. This is what we've worked all these years to achieve, is this. This is the sort of pinnacle of success, and you don't want to do it. You're mad. Well, of course he was mad, but I mean, that wasn't the point. It was just, it was a really clear indication. I mean, I was shocked. I was really shocked.
Syd suddenly was starting to get recognised, and he would be a sort of, scrumptious pop idol. Maybe he sort of thought, do I really want this life? Is this really what I want? And maybe that's what was coming out unconsciously then in all the wacky behaviour. I mean, was all the wacky behaviour a rejection of becoming a pop star?
I remember one day we were going off to do a gig, and we went to pick him up, and he jumped into the car, and he was wearing a frock. I said, what are you doing, Syd? And he said, I'm homosexual. And he went through this whole thing, where he pretended to be gay for like days on end.
The Floyd was losing not only its leader, but also the writer responsible for much of its original material and hit singles.
So, we took a very positive view, and we all went, don't show me. It was denial at the ultimate level, really.
I mean, Roger has a theory he was schizophrenic. I don't think it's true. I don't think he was. But I'm still convinced that he took a huge overdose of acid and destroyed his brain cells. He went to see Ronnie Lang, and he said there's nothing we can do for him. Physically, the brain is actually being destroyed. So, very sad.
No amount of English reserve could mask the fact that Barrett was now an acid casualty, virtually unable to perform. The other band members called a crisis meeting with managers Peter Jenner, Andrew King and Brian Morrison.
Peter Jenner and Andrew King were absolutely convinced that without Syd there was no Pink Floyd. You solve this problem or you go back to being an architect. If you don't solve this problem, it's over.
Panic. And and terrible concern, because it was a mixture of a sort of business panic, because we need another single. Syd, please, can you write another single?
Syd didn't know what he thought. Oh, well, what? No, Syd's got an idea. Oh, really? What is it? Syd thinks you should hire 2 girl saxophone players. And that was it, I think. Oh, yeah, well, no. You know, no.
Brian Morrison, who was a Barrett boy, said the name's Pink Floyd. As long as we put out the Pink Floyd, no one's going to know the difference. By the way, which one of you is Syd?
It was Barrett's old Cambridge friend, David Gilmour, who was asked by the band to join Pink Floyd.
When you're all young, thrusting, ambitious people in your early 20s, you have a brutality about the things you do that, you know, your ambition is driving you forwards without much care for other people's feelings, to be frank. And you have plenty of time to feel guilty later.
As 1967 gave way to 1968, Syd Barrett gave way to David Gilmour as Pink Floyd passed through a brief 5-member transition.
I think it was odd for David, it was odd for Syd, and the rest of us were a bit embarrassed about it. We nearly said something. That's how bad it was.
So I think it was difficult for David because when he came into the band, I think his role was to try and play Syd's guitar parts.
It was his band. It was him and about him. I think I coped with it okay. There were moments of feeling lost on stage and not knowing what the hell was going on around me, and I did tend to spend some of my time with my back to the audience, sort of sliding, you know, mic stand legs up the guitar and making weird noises, feeling rather embarrassed. But that's not all the time. It's quite a bit of the time it really worked and gelled, and you started thinking, yeah, I'm beginning to get what we're on about here.
The band was now recording that difficult second album, a saucer full of secrets.
Some of the tracks were already recorded. I think Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, which is Roger's first real moment of glory, I suppose, was already pretty well done. And I think there's a sort of a guitar on there that Syd did, and there's a bit of guitar on there that I did. I think that's the only moment that we share on a track. One of the things that worked quite well were sort of very rhythmic moments. We did break some new ground by actually allowing the music sometimes to sort of drop down, drop away, and become this more sort of ethereal, spacey music.
It was deep space that now attracted the Floyds' attention, as it did countless millions of other hopefuls worldwide in 1969.
The world television audience of 600 million people this afternoon watched the Apollo 11 spacecraft launched into a perfect blue sky above Cape Kennedy in Florida.
As the first men walked on the moon, Pink Floyd played along with the TV pictures for the BBC.
We were there in the studio playing live while people were walking on the moon. I can't quite imagine it today, that behind a program they'd have a pop group making up a jam live in the studio while that was going on. Those were the days.
aircraft reports a visual with 3 full shoots.
When the Floyd returned to Earth, they discovered that producing singles without Barrett was mission impossible.
We all tried to write singles. Point Me at the Sky was one notable failure. Yeah, couldn't do it. And eventually we just sort of gave up and went, well, we can't do that. All right, what can we do? Well, we do long things then, you know.
Careful with that axe, Eugene announced a Floyd of extended rock-driven soundscapes and implied narratives, a kind of space rock made by an unidentified crew now journeying without a captain.
We were fantastically insular. We didn't really want to be influenced by other people and things that were going on. We were fiercely independent of what we were doing. We did learn quite a lot about improvising and about listening to what other people were doing and picking up an idea and sort of developing it.
This was the age of experimentation and difficult music, of prepared pianos and classical pretensions, saucepans full of secrets, all of which the Floyd embraced.
A lot of the time, it would just be like plonky noises. We would be searching for something, and it didn't work. And ultimately, to me personally, it became rather unsatisfying.
I think it was Roger said, let's make an album without using any of our instruments, but use household objects. So we'd spend days getting a pencil and a rubber band till it sounded like a bass. Right? We would spend weeks and weeks on doing this. Nick would find old, saucepans and stuff, and then deaden them to try and make them sound exactly like a snare drum. I remember sitting down with Roger and saying, Roger, this is insane.
Atom Heart Mother was the Floyd's most ambitious experiment yet, a rock suite incorporating a brass band and choir.
The musician didn't really give a shit. It was basically a brass band, but it didn't give a shit. They just wanted to have their beer and get pissed. It was kind of very weird.
Atom Heart Mother was always it was like a movie soundtrack. It was meant to be a sort of soundtrack to an epic movie that didn't exist.
It was an interesting exercise, but it doesn't hold an enormous amount of Pink Floyd development.
Their fans disagreed, and the record went to #1 in the album charts in October 1970. But as the members sharpened their songwriting skills, strengthened their musical partnership, and focused their experimental ambitions, they hit a creative peak on their next album, Medal, with a little help from Seamus the dog.
took a while before any of us started turning up songs that we thought were good, and I suppose our confidence to move slightly away from being quite so out there as we were came with time.
The Floyd had fathered British prog rock and, unwittingly, its self-indulgent excesses. But they showed exactly how it should be done with Echoes, a 23-minute track that made up the entire second side of the Medal album.
Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless upon the air.
The whole band were working on it together.
Rolling waves in labyrinths of coral caves.
Everyone would be throwing things in and seeing what worked and what didn't.
All encouraging each other, all getting inspired by other people's ideas, and it was a really collected piece of music. I think we found our feet. I think we found we can do this without Syd.
Roger would be driving it more than anyone else, mostly, you know, in its dynamic range.
All of that work, everything that we did there, I look upon really as a sort of serving our apprenticeship, you know, before we could actually say, right, now we're ready, you know, put on your apron, we're going to make Dark Side of the Moon. We've learned how to use our chisels, and we'll do it properly this time.
In 1973, the Floyd returned to the moon, but this time to its dark side. Times had changed. 60s optimism had given way to the troubled 70s. This was a world in eclipse, materialistic and authoritarian. Anything is possible had become nothing is possible. Roger Waters' lyrics spat back at a world now peopled by us and them. The records sold millions and gave them their first #1 album in the States.
They had become conflated in my mind with this thing, which I had really thought was the death of music. Prog rock and stuff like that. It was over-considered, middle-class, intellectual, English stuff. I didn't have it uniquely amongst the planet, I have to say, but it's only much later that I realised the scale of their achievement. What it is a great record. That's what it is. It is absolutely one of the cardinal pillars of rock and roll, in my view, now.
I certainly knew, as we were making this album, that something quite magical is happening. I remember sitting on the final listing and all of a sudden, that is good. That is very good.
One of the elements that made it so successful was the fact that bloody record company pulled their finger out and got on with it. That initial surge and that #1 in America was very, very important. It was certainly, apart from the enormously talented drumming on it, was to do with the record company doing their job. This album just shot up and was so enormous, and we were leapt into a different stratosphere. And part of you wants it, you know, you want that success, you love it, you know, you want people to love you. to pretend they love you. It's a drug.
Dark Side represents not only the band's biggest commercial hit, but also their most successful artistic collaboration. 4 men, 1 band. It would never be quite the same again.
Are there some difficult moments? Yes.
How do you get around them?
We pretend they're not there. We certainly don't face up to them in an adult way, if that's what you mean.
I don't know, we understand each other very well, we're very tolerant with each other. But there are a lot of things unsaid as well.
We're all from the British aristocracy, with the exception of David Gilmour, and all our mothers are countesses and things like that. And duchesses. Yeah. I mean, obviously they're all a gang of idiots, but, you know, live and let live. That's what they said to Beethoven, you know?
In America, a record executive puffed on his cigar and asked the group, "Oh, by the way, which one's pink?"
Roger had by this time become the lyricist. And it really was kind of teamwork then, because David and me will write some music, and Roger say, "Okay, I'm going to go home and write some lyrics for this and come back tomorrow." You know, that was how the writing was working then.
But this Pink Floyd seemed regretful and sometimes angry. This wasn't pop music as we'd known it, but a new and surprisingly commercial strain of English melancholy.
If I'm at home and I go on the piano, it's all very melancholic what I play. And I keep sometimes saying to myself, "You've got to get out of this, you've got to, come on, do something a bit more upbeat." David's kind of melancholic too, in his guitaring playing, against Roger's rather fiery and political and angry lyrics. So it's quite an interesting combination.
People naturally experience an unease about all of this. I think we human beings, most human beings, experience a natural unease. They think, well, on the surface all of this seems to be working, but it just doesn't somehow sit right with me. That's why people attach to it. They're attached to this work because there's a sense of relief when you, even if it's melancholic, then you go, "Oh my God, somebody else gets it too. Somebody else feels this sense of unease."
Well, it's Roger's phrase, quiet desperation. Isn't that what he says? It is the English way. Isn't that what he says? Something like that. Dave is quintessentially English. And there's a reserve. And it's hard to break out of it. So he doesn't. He just plays it.
The daunting task of following Dark Side of the Moon was finally clinched back at Abbey Road Studios in 1975. The spectre of Syd Barrett was celebrated, if not fully laid to rest, on what would become their second most successful album, Wish You Were Here. They paid tribute to their mercurial founder in an emotionally charged anthem that would become an essential part of any Pink Floyd concert.
Remember when you were young? You shone like the sun. Shine on, you blaze a diamond. Now there's a look in your eyes, like black holes in the sky.
which Syd left, and their consistent determination to link themselves to Syd and to talk about him, to sing about him, to write songs about him, I think that it's been good karma for them.
He's there because I think we all know that the band wouldn't have sort of existed without him kicking it off. I think we also felt that, having dropped him out of the band, that perhaps we have a bit of guilt about, of course we should have done something better for him.
It's funny, when Syd died last year, I realised that, by and large, I'd already done all my grieving. I'd done it 20 years before, and I'd been doing it.
The Floyd had always been a multimedia band, but the innocent DIY days of the late 60s were long gone. The band now commanded huge stadiums and pioneered a form of rock theatre that amazed and delighted their ever-expanding audience. But they continued to hide behind the pyrotechnics.
We don't exist, we're just a brand, here we are. Don't put any lights on us, be distracted by these fucking flying pigs and airplanes, Just keep away from us, you're not getting near us.
Our cosy rapport with the audience that were there entirely for us, and would be very quiet in the quiet bits, you could hear a pin drop. That sort of whole thing where we felt at one with our audience changed rather.
Rather than focusing on the individuals, what did they want to focus on? The music. But how do you do that to punters without boring them?
Quite a lot of people are playing frisbee at the back, and you've got to try and get them to join in. And that's the real reason for doing big things, because you want everyone to enjoy the show.
It's impossible to think or to imagine that in every largish town there are 50,000 people who know and love your music. It's just not really realistic to believe that.
Well, Dave particularly was very against doing anything. Why can't we just stand on stage and play the songs? Well, it'll be boring,
Waters, the most organised, motivated and ambitious member of the group, pushed ahead, planning ever higher concepts and bigger extravaganzas, making Pigs Fly and Pink Floyd the show in town. But his increasing disgust with society and authority now put him and the band in conflict with the very audiences that flocked to their stadium shows, which were becoming an increasingly empty spectacle.
There was a lot of show. That Animals was really a big show. I became rather disenchanted with it and thought that too much was lost. What was gained from having a large congregation of people, communing together, which is what a stadium at its best is, was being lost in a sort of watering down of the way the message got across to the audience. I thought it was kind of inhuman and only about money.
On the 77 Animals tour, Waters himself conceded defeat by stadium when he spat, like an older, angrier Johnny Rotten, at a member of the audience.
One of the very irritating things about being post-show is when it's been a bad one and someone comes in and says, that was fucking great, because you resent them and you think, what the fuck do you know? It was crap.
Waters' personal response to the Animals incident and the dead end of the stadium experience was to make physical and mental barriers and his sense of alienation the subject of the Floyd's next project. He would rewrite the book of rock theatre on the wall.
If you show yourself, it's a risk. You take the risk of being rejected. If you have pretensions to being an artist of any kind, you have to take the risk of people rejecting you and thinking you're an arsehole. Well, that's crap. said, well, you know, you may think it is, but it's me.
Waters approached the wall as a one-man construction crew, but his determined vision and combative leadership marginalised the other members.
You know, my confidence in my own lyric writing has not always been that high, and Roger showed a very strong desire to be the lyricist, and we all lazily allowed that to happen.
One, I didn't have any material to offer. David didn't really either. And Roger had begun to think, well, I'm the writer of this band, and I don't want anyone else to write. I'm going to become the... It was the start of that whole thing. So I'm to blame for not having anything, and he's to blame for not encouraging anything to come.
Oh, he wouldn't let us write. What? You know, I mean, that's just so sort of stupid. Desperate for people to write. Always, 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 always.
Is there anybody out there?
The fact of the matter is, Roger arrived with the wall more or less pre-written. So that was a hell of a different thing to Dark Side.
Is there anybody out there?
Now the indisputable leader of the band, Waters, frustrated by a lack of support, sacked one of its co-founding original members, keyboard player Rick Wright.
Our personal relationship broke down completely by the wall. That's when I left. But interesting thing is, when I was asked to leave, I said, I will, but I want to finish this and I want to play live. I want to play the performances, and Roger was totally happy for me to play. I think it was a personality clash, a lot to do with it. And his belief that he was the band. And that the other musicians, I mean, that story goes as Nick was the next one to be thrown out by him.
We'd reached the point where Roger actually thought, hang on a minute, why am I working with these other people who he felt were not really helping him do what he wanted. In fact, if anything, they were criticising, you know, going, oh, no, I don't think that's quite right, Roger.
Regime change was in the air.
My musical taste and abilities had just as much, actually, if not more, to do with it all than Roger's, and that if I allowed this dictatorship to become real and total, then our music would suffer, because I didn't think that, and still don't, that is really Roger's main forte.
When I was that very young guy in that band all those years ago, I would stand in the corner and smoke cigarettes endlessly and sort of snarl. I'm not as reactionary in the literal sense of the word as I was when I was a young man. I don't immediately feel I've got to, you know, hurt you before you hurt me.
The band made one more record together, The Final Cut, but in most respects it was a solo album from Waters. Soon after, he informed their record company that he was leaving and declared that Pink Floyd was no more.
Oh, make 'em me, oh, make 'em you, make 'em do what you want them to.
This was something David Gilmour, in particular, refused to accept.
Make 'em lay down and die.
I think he was very surprised when David and Nick said, okay, you can leave the band, fine. And didn't expect them to say, okay, now we're going to make an album, Pink Floyd album, go on tour without you.
It seemed important to me to just get on and do the very best you can do. And, you know, Syd Barrett's Pink Floyd had been one Pink Floyd, and the Pink Floyd with the four of us, Roger, Rick, Nick and I, had been another one, and this would be another version.
That, I think, shocked him a bit. Well, not shocked him, but it made him angry. Well, we know it made him angry because he tried to stop it.
The argument was me rather pompously, and I admit now erroneously, suggesting that because I wasn't in the band anymore, that the brand and band name should be retired. It's not up. It wasn't up to me.
It's a battle about using a name, but it's a name that all of us had spent our entire adult lives working on. As anonymous as we all have been throughout that Pink Floyd history.
I mean, after all, who's Nick Mason? Oh, he's the drummer of the Pink Floyd. Who's Rick? Oh, he's the keyboard player of the Pink Floyd. Who's Roger? Oh, well, Roger Waters is the guy who was in the Pink Floyd. You know, that's who they are.
Spurred into action, Gilmour wrote and recorded a new Floyd album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, with new collaborators. Released in 1987, it went on to sell 9 million copies and encouraged Gilmour to tour the Floyd, with Rick Wright and Nick Mason fully reinstated.
Into the distance, ribbon of black, stretched to the point of no turning back. Fly to fancy.
When the band played live in Venice in July 1989, the televised event was watched around the globe. Pink Floyd were back, bigger than ever, and with a new leader.
Irresistible grasp. Got my eyes from the southern sky. Tongue-tied, twisted, just earthbound, asking high. Ice is forming on the tip.
Pink Floyd toured the world, as did a solo Roger Waters, who performed his version of The Wall in Berlin in 1990. Both played the band's most popular numbers, while lawsuits and bad blood flowed between them.
I remember one particular night I'm playing in Cincinnati to about 2,000 people in a 6,000-seat arena, and they were playing the next day to 60,000 people in the football stadium next door, playing all my songs, that was hard to take.
The Momentary Lapse of Reason tour restored the confidence of both Rick Wright and Nick Mason. Under Gilmour's leadership, the band now worked together again as a team for what would be the last original Pink Floyd album. The Division Bell began life here in 1993 in Gilmour's floating studio, moored at Hampton Court.
We decided how to start this one. We'd all go and jam, for a week or so. Let's start playing together again. And after that came the Vision Bell. So it was a true sort of Floyd writing partnership again.
Well, that sounds to me like something that needs development, but it could almost be,
I have nothing to say.
It was a happier Pink Floyd that continued recording the Division Bell throughout 1993. Happy together, but nonetheless compelled to gaze once again back into their past for the closing track, High Hopes.
The grass was green. The light was bright. The taste was sweet. The nights of wonder.
think about how many different versions, different lead songwriters they've had. And yet, there's something that links it all. And certainly they managed to make the changes evolutionary and gradual, and always maintaining a certain kind of sound.
More than a decade after the Division Bell was released, the Pink Floyd lawsuits had subsided and the band had been put on ice, Bob Geldof wanted the 4 surviving members of the group to reunite as the climax of his Live 8 event, a task akin to making Poverty history. He opened negotiations with David Gilmour.
I really don't do the hard sell because I don't want to do it to him, And he's desperate not to do this. I can see it. He's not going to do it. And I just have to say, 1, no one in Pink Floyd world feels that you guys ever said goodbye properly. And that's true. 2, it's 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes. We're going on tour. Spare me. Don't tell me that the Pink Floyd getting back together again will not seize the entire... That's the thing that makes this totally different.
Gilmour said no. So Geldof contacted Waters, who called Gilmour, who called Geldof, and so on. Eventually, 4 men buried the axe and agreed to play together just one more time as Pink Floyd.
We had a meeting with Roger and he wanted to do other songs, and basically David said, look, they've asked Pink Floyd to play and we're Pink Floyd, so we're going to do these songs, and if you would like to play them with us, that'd be great. So he was very humble, actually. Roger was, and he knew that, he realised that, but he loved it.
And to me, it was also very good to be able to get back onto speaking terms after all the bickering with Roger over the years, and for us to maybe grow up a little bit and become adult human beings in some sort of reasonable relationship for that moment. Mummy, it was terrific. From the playing point of view, it was really easy and really nice and fun to play together. I mean, for me, playing with Roger, the relationship between a bass player and drummer is slightly sort of special because you sort of just intuitively generally know which mistakes we're going to make next.
Great to have Roger standing next to me, playing the bass. It did bring back memories and a little bit of emotion.
I think it's great that happened. I think that was great. And if that's the only time that we get to sort of draw a line under it, well then, so be it. I'd like to do more of it. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was very interesting musically and emotionally and philosophically.
This vast, numberless constituency gathered about because these 4 men said, yeah, enough's enough. This single thing is important enough to put aside this pathetic misgivings of the past. There was nothing more potent or symbolic on that night that these 4 old geezers playing so beautifully, laying their own ghosts to rest. And the thing is, it worked. There are 20 million children in school now because of what went on all during that week. And emblematic of that week was this signature group and this great moment in their lives, I think.
Body language was funny. Roger seemed, yeah, I'm back, you know, sort of very pleased. And the others were kind of like that a bit, you know.
We were a family, you know, and we went through divorce. A marriage, and we went through divorce. And don't know who divorced who, but anyway.
I didn't feel like a family. I feel, you know, there are connections that I feel with, you know, with my mother and my brother that I don't feel for anybody that I was in Pink Floyd with.
It's very like a family, and you get sick of each other in the way that you do in families, and you get this wonderful honesty, you know, shouting at people, telling them how useless they are and what they've done wrong. It's a bit like the Munsters, if you know what I mean.
Well, there it is. I think you can pass your verdict as well as I can. My verdict is that it is a little bit of a regression to childhood. But after all, why not?
Taste all you feel, and all that you love, and all that you hate, all you distrust, all you save, and all that you give, and all that you deal, and all that you buy, beg, borrow, or steal, and all you create.
I would love to go out and play the Floyd music again.
Stubborn isn't the word. We were talking about, you know, leading a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, these horses can't even be led to the water.
I don't think it will happen, but I think, well, you can ask Dave when you speak to him.
I think it happens.
A dark comedy chiller coming up on BBC One. Max von Sydow stars in Stephen King's Needful Things next.